any questions as we're going over this, feel free to ask. For number 1, this was an and inequality, so you should have solved everything together at the same time. You would have divided everything by 6. So this would have given you -1 is less than or equal to a, which is less than 5. So that was your inequality answer. You could have also put it in interval notation, but that was fine. And then this would have been a closed circle at -1, an open circle at 5, with a line going or connecting them. This was worth 3 points, 1 for showing your work, 1 for your final answer, and 1 for your graph correctly. Do we have any questions on that? Number 2 was an or inequality, and you had to solve both of these separately. So not doing the same thing to both. For this first one, you would have added 3 to both sides. So 4x is now less than 0. And then divided both sides by 4. So x is now less than 0. That would be an open circle at 0 going to the left. And then we could have done the same thing to the other side. Except in this case, we are subtracting 3 to both sides. So we have -2x is less than -4. And we could divide both sides by -2. So x is now greater than +2. There would be an open circle at 2 going to the right. There would be an or in between those two. This was worth 4 points, 1 for your work of 1, work for the other. Your inequality answer was 1, and then your graph was 1. Do we have any questions on that one? If you weren't here or you didn't get these correct, make sure you're writing this down so you know what to do or not do for the test tomorrow. For number 3, same thing. This was an or inequality, so you had to solve both of them separately. So on the left, we needed to add 5 to both sides. So we have -b is less than 3. And then divide both sides by -1. So b is now greater than -3. So that would be an open circle at -3 going to the right. And then for your other one, we would subtract 6 on both sides. So 4b is less than or equal to -20. Divide both sides by 4. So b is less than or equal to -5. That would be a closed circle going to the left. And then we need an or in between. If you switch these so that this was actually on this side, that was fine too. And that one was again 4 points. Do we have any questions on that one? For the last one, there were a lot of things you needed to move to the other side. So for this first one on the left, I'm going to move my variable terms to the left, so minus 2k, and then add 5. So this would give me -5k is less than or equal to 0. I would divide both sides by -5. My 1 would change direction, so it is now greater than or equal to 0. There would be a closed circle at 0 going to the right. And then for the other side, I'm again going to move my variable term to the left. If you did it the opposite way, that's fine. And add 2. So I have negative 2k is greater than or equal to 8. And then divide both sides by negative 2. My sign would again change directions, and it would be less than or equal to negative 4. There would be a closed circle going to the left, and there would be an or in between them. So that was again 4 points. So total, this section was worth 15. Do we have any questions on that one or this section in general? Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. For the second section, you have to either factor out a GCF or just find your factors. For this, because there's nothing in front of your square term, you're looking for two numbers that multiply to be negative 15, but add to be 2. The two numbers that would have worked are positive 5 and negative 3. So you would put those as your factors, m plus 5 and m minus 3. Most of you got 5 and 8, but not so much on 6 and 7. This was worth 2 points, getting each factor correctly. Do you have any questions on 5 before we continue? For number 6, you should have seen that yes, there was a number in front of this, but because of the section it's in, you should be asking yourself, does this have a GCF? And it did, 5. And if it did, you should have factored that out, divided each of these by 5 to get n squared plus 2n plus 1. Then from there, you're looking for two numbers that multiply to be 1, but add to be 2. And the only two numbers that would work are 1 and 1. So you would bring down your GCF, your 5, and your two factors would be n plus 1, n plus 1. Or 5 times n plus 1 squared. Some of you were factoring from the original and got n plus 5 squared, which was incorrect. So this one was worth 3 points, being able to factor out your GCF and getting the other two factors. Some of you were doing these in the method of how you would factor on the back, which was fine if you factored it all the way. And I'll show what I mean here in a second. I'll do that with number 7. Before I do 7, actually. Do we have any questions on 6? For 7, same thing. You would need to factor out the GCF, which was 2. If you divided each of these by 2, you would get n squared plus 2n plus 1. This happened by coincidence that these two had the same inside, which means the numbers that you're going to get are going to be the same. this, our GCF, is different. So we have 2 times n plus 1, n plus 1, or 2 times n plus 1 squared. Some of you had n plus 2 squared, and that was incorrect. Let's say you did not do the GCF, and which many of you did not, and did it the other way. So you multiplied 2 times 2 to get 4, and you're looking for 2 numbers that multiply to be 4, that also add to be 4. The 2 numbers that would work are 2 and 2. So then you would rewrite this as 2n squared plus 2n plus 2n plus 2. This should tell you there was a GCF. You could have factored that out. But even if that didn't click any light bulbs or bells, and you still went through this process, these two have 2n in common. So if you factor that out, n plus 1 would be left. These two have positive 2 in common. So if you factor that out, n plus 1 would be left. And you'd have 2n plus 2 and n plus 1. If you got this far, you should have seen that these both share a 2 that could be factored out again. So either way, you should have gotten 2 times n plus 1, n plus 1. Do we have any questions on 7? For number 8, you were looking for 2 numbers that multiply to be 15, but added to be negative 8, is what that should have been. Some of you had the right numbers, but put the wrong signs. Remember that this was negative 8, so these should have both been negative. So your factors were m minus 5 and m minus 3. Questions on that one? Do we have any questions on this section in general? On the back. Some of you got partial credit even if you didn't do everything, but these were either worth 6 or 7 points depending on the question. For number 9, always look and see, does it have a GCF first? This one did not, except 1. So we're looking for 2 numbers that multiply to be negative 40, but add to be negative 3. The 2 numbers that would have worked were negative 8 and positive 5. You didn't have to do this exactly, but something that told me that you multiplied these 2 numbers and got these 2 numbers outside of putting it in your equation was worth 1 point. Rewriting it as 4 terms was worth 1 point. So 2r squared minus 8r plus 5r minus 20. And then splitting the middle. If you switch these, your GCF may be a little different, but that's okay. I still give you credit for that. These two have in common 2r. If we divide that out, r minus 4 is left. These two have 5 in common, positive 5. If we divide that out, r minus 4 will be left. And then our final answer should be 2r plus 5 and r minus 4. So you got a point for this process, however you showed that, a point for this, a point for factoring out each of these numbers, and a point for each correct factor. So that was worth 6 points. Do you have any questions on that one? Number 10. You should have factored out or saw that you could divide out a 2 out of all of these, which would leave us with 4r squared minus 4r plus 1. And then from there, we're looking for two numbers that multiply to be 4, but add or subtract to be negative 4. And the two numbers that work are negative 2 and negative 2. So then we would rewrite. Keep bringing down your GCF. This would be 4r squared minus 2r plus 1. And then splitting the middle and finding the greatest common factor. These two have 2r in common. So that would be 2r. And then if I divide those both out, I'd have 2r and minus 1. These two have a negative 1 in common. So if I divide that out, we have 2r minus 1. I think this was on the bottom one, or maybe I'm thinking of something different. Only factor out a negative if that's the first term. So like in this case, the first of these two is negative, so we factored out a negative. But for these two, we would not factor out a negative because this one is not negative. So then our factors would be 2 times 2r minus 1 and 2r minus 1, or 2 times 2r minus 1 squared. So that one was worth 7 points because of the GCF you had to factor out. Do we have any questions on that one? For number 11, same process. Multiply 6 and 8. So you're looking for two numbers that multiply to be 48, but add to be negative 49. Remember that the closer these two numbers are, one of your answers is going to be 1 or negative 1. In this case, it was negative 1 and negative 48. So when we rewrite this would be 6t squared minus t minus 48t plus 8. And then from there, these two have t in common, which would leave 6t minus 1. These two have negative 8 in common, which would leave 6t minus 1. So our two factors would be t minus 8 and 6t minus 1. So this one was worth 6 points. Do you have any questions on that one? one you could divide 3 out of everything. So that would give us 5y squared minus 6y minus 8. So we're looking for two numbers that multiply to be negative 40, but add to be negative 6. The two numbers that would work were negative 10 and positive 4. So then you could rewrite 5y squared minus 10y plus 4y minus 8. And then the first two have 5y in common. So if we divide that out, y minus 2 would be left. Of the last two, positive 4 is what we can divide out of both. And y minus 2 would be left.
How do you get 40?
Multiply 5 and negative 8, and the negative 6 in the middle. And then our final answers would be 3 times 5y plus 4 and y minus 2. Do we have any questions on that one? Or anything in this section, or anything in general? If we don't have any other questions, I would say this. Make sure you have these written down so you can use it to study, go back and practice questions from your review. If you need additional copies of that, let me know. I can get that for you. That way you can practice and be good for your test tomorrow. And you can use this